Welcome back to part 2 of this particular video where we are determining which possible value of x is correct, A, B, C, or D. And so I'm first starting off with the first possible way to answer the question, and that is factoring. I'm going to show you here in a moment the two ways to factor, right? But you want to set the equation equal to 0, right? Equal to 0. And find all the zeros of the function. That's essentially just factoring, finding the possible zeros of the function. So we have x squared plus 3x equals 10, right? You want to get this right side of the equal sign equal to 0. What would I add to a positive 10 that you see here that would turn this 10 into 0? Well, 10 plus a negative 10 would give me 0, right? But what I do to the right side of the equal sign, I have to do to the left side of the equal sign. So we're going to add like terms. If you don't know what like terms are, please check out my video on like term versus unlike term. Here, x squared and a positive 3x are not like terms, and they are not a like term to the whole number here, negative 10. Or excuse me, the integer negative 10. So 0 plus a negative 10 is negative 10, right? Equals 10 plus a negative 10, or 10 minus 10 is 0, right? So we want to set that equation equal to 0. Next, we're going to factor. Now, there's two ways you can factor. You can, since this is set equal to 0, you can label your A, B, C values and use the quadratic equation to factor. That would give you the two possible values for x in factoring. And of course, once you find what x equals, you have to substitute it back into the original equation and verify, which I'll show you how to do a little bit, or I'll talk about it a little bit later. The other way to factor is to find two numbers that multiply to a negative 10, but then they add up to a positive 3. And I'm going to set up my FOIL with those two sets of parentheses, two sets of parentheses equal to 0, right? And inside the very beginning left side of each of those parentheses, I'll set up an x. Why? Because I know x times x is x squared. Then right next to those values, I'm going to put the two numbers that multiply to negative 10, but add up to a positive 3. If that does not sound familiar, it's called I call it reverse FOIL. Check out my videos on factoring. I go over FOIL and reverse FOIL many different times, and it will become crystal clear to you. All right, so what are the two numbers that multiply to a negative 10, yet they add up to a positive 3? Let's go ahead and take a look at those here. Pardon my little bit of shaking going on here. I apologize. There's some shaking here happening today. All right, so now we're going to factor. We're going to find the two numbers that multiply to a negative 10, right? And negative 1 times 10 is negative 10. 1 times a negative 10 is negative 10. Negative 2 times 5 is negative 10. And 2 times a negative 5 is negative 10. So all of these numbers multiply to a negative 10. Which one adds up to that positive 3 term in the middle? Well, I know a negative 2 plus a positive 5 would give me a positive 3. So these are going to be the two numbers I'm going to include in my reverse FOIL in setting up my values. Down here, I just wanted to review with you, when you multiply x times x, right, there's an invisible 1 in front of that x. 1 times 1 is 1x. And then if you have the same base, you add the exponents. There's an invisible 1 exponent above each of these x values, and 1 plus 1 is 2. So x times x gives you x squared. Okay, if this is unfamiliar to you, check out my videos on invisible ones and exponential rules. I go over this in-depthly, and this will become very familiar to you. All right, so again, what two numbers multiply to negative 10, but they would add up to a positive 3. That's the middle term. We determined it would be a negative 2 and a 5. So I'm going to setting up my reverse foil. First, outer, inner, last. Check out my video. I go over that in-depthly. And here you can see, pardon me, the two sets of parentheses where x is at the very beginning of these parentheses. Why? X times x is x squared. Right? And if you follow my foil, it explains it in-depthly. The last term, negative 2 times 5, is a negative 10. When you add these two terms up, because when you FOIL, it would be negative 2 times 1x plus x times 1x times 5 is 5. When you add them together, you get that positive 3x value. Okay, so check out my videos if you're unfamiliar, and then come on back and watch this video. It'll click and it'll make total sense to you if it does not already. All right, so what I'm going to do now is set up each of these parentheses equal to 0. And I'm going to solve for x. And then, in order to determine the correct answer, I need to substitute what x equals into the original problem, the original equation in the question, all right, back in part 1. So let's go ahead and do that. Set each of these parenthesis values equal to 0, right? X plus a negative 2 equals 0, which you see here. And x plus 5 equals to 0, which you see here. Now I'm going to solve for x. What does that mean? I need to get that x all by itself. What number plus the negative 2 gets me 0? A positive 2. Or 2 minus 2 gives me 0. What you do to the left side of the equal sign, you gotta do to the right side, right? So 0 plus 2 is 2. So x is now by itself. X equals 2. And what would you add to a positive 5 to get 0? Well, 5 plus a negative 5 would give me 0, or 5 minus 5. X is all by itself. But you do to the left side of the equal sign, you got to do to the right side. 0 plus a negative 5 is negative 5. So now we have our two values for factoring this particular equation, because we set that equal to 0. Now we need to determine which is the correct answer. So remember, this is just one way to answer this question. But what you need to do, and I'm going to raise this up here a little bit and include the original problem. What you need to do is substitute each value for x one at a time for x in the original problem. And if one side equals the other side after you simplify, then you know that's a correct answer. So I'm going to first substitute 2 in for each of the x's, right? And 2 times 2, or 2 squared, is 4. Plus 3 times 2 is 6. What's 4 plus 6 is 10. So 10 would equal 10. X equals 2 checks off. That's a correct answer to this particular factorization. Now I'm going to substitute x equals negative 5, or I'll put a negative 5 everywhere. I'll substitute a negative 5 everywhere I see x. Negative 5 squared is a negative 5 times a negative 5, which is a positive 25. Plus 3 times a negative 5 is a negative, 3 times a negative 5 is a negative 15. So you have a positive 25 plus a negative 15. 25 plus a negative 15 gives me 10. 10 equals 10. Yes, this answer also checks off. X equals negative 5. So, which would be the possible answer? You know, both 2 and negative 5 are correct. I have a 2 here for C. I do not have a negative 5 in my options. Which would be a possible answer? That would be answer C. Hey, if you found these videos helpful, please like, follow, and share these videos. Help me reach 10,000 followers. I know we can do it. All right, thank you for your time. Math is easy. Take it step by step. Stick around for part 3 video. I'll show you possibly the easiest and quickest way to answer this particular GED type of questions. Kind of like a cheat. Thank you for your time.